Hello, how's everyone out there doing today? Probably better than I was when I decided to pick out today's game for review, but that's putting the cart before the horse a bit. Anyway, if you're a returning subscriber, thanks for coming back, but if you're a new viewer to the channel, you may be wondering what I'm doing here. Well, a few years ago, after seeing Nintendo game after Nintendo game focused on and documented on YouTube, I decided that it seemed like there was a significant gap out there when it comes to Sega coverage. Now, of course, there are some great, I'll say content creators, even though I don't love that BS marketing term, out there for the Sega. I'm certainly not going to claim that I'm the only guy doing this, but when you look at the realm of retro gaming, especially in the United States, it is highly slanted towards games on other platforms. As a result, I decided I was going to throw my hat in the ring, so to speak, and try to balance out the scales a bit. But I didn't want to just review the same 10 Sega games that everyone's already familiar with. No, I wanted to review all of them, give them all a spotlight. So that's what I'm doing with Zilog and Moto. In-depth reviews, including packaging and game footage recorded on original hardware for all English language games released for the Sega Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, Sega CD, and 32X. Basically, if you can play it in some fashion on a Genesis, perhaps with an accessory or two, I'm going to cover it. If that sounds interesting to you and you enjoyed this video, think about liking and subscribing, as it will help other people find these videos and maybe learn something they didn't know about a game that they didn't know exists. And that may very well be the case with today's game, as while it's based around one of the most well-known children's toy properties in the world, this is a game that chances are may have passed you by, especially if you don't live in the United States, as today's game, Barbie Super Model, is one of the seldom seen titles for the Genesis/Mega Drive platform that was released exclusively in the United States. Or at least this version of the game was, because in a bizarre twist, Brazil, home to many, many Sega releases over the years, didn't get a Genesis version of Barbie Super Model, but they did get a version of the Super Nintendo port. I'm still kind of scratching my head about that one. Barbie, if you've been living under a rock, is of course the famous dress-up doll from Mattel that children of all ages have been playing with since its debut in March of 1959. Over the years, the Barbie line has moved beyond just the original figure, with also other male and female friends, siblings, and pets being introduced, all with their own clothing and accessory options. And of course, Barbie has to get around and have a place to live, so there's been Barbie Corvettes and Barbie Dream Houses for children to play with as well. Due to the popularity of the toys, Barbie has become part of pop culture and has been integrated into all sorts of other licensed properties over the years, including an upcoming big-budget movie starring Margot Robbie as the titular character. And games are no exception, which brings us to Barbie Super Model to date. Barbie Super Model, released in 1993, is the fourth game based on the character, following up appearances on the Commodore 64, DOS and the NES, and finally the Game Boy. You might be a little surprised to hear that by 1993 Barbie only had 4 video games based around the character, but something tells me once I start to play this game, it might be apparent why. I don't know. I've just got a bad feeling. Maybe it's valid, maybe it's not. I'm sure it's nothing. Anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the package. And this is Barbie Super Model in all of its pink glory. This particular copy is probably in much better condition than it probably should be, at least on the outside. To say I didn't care about having a quality copy of this is a huge understatement, but even for bad games, I still have some pride, so I'm happy it's held up well. The hang tab is intact at the top, and the outer cover looks pretty good, minus a few scuffs and scratches. The inner cover is near perfect, and you can tell that signature Barbie pink is still very much as bright as it was on the store shelves 30 years ago. If you were so inclined to pick this up, and I'm not sure why you would be, unless you're a hardcore collector, complete copies in this condition go for about $15 right now. And there's also apparently a Majesco cardboard box re-release floating around out there as well. Normally at this point, I would possibly compare the different international versions of the game to one another, but as mentioned in the intro, this was a US exclusive, so there's no other odd alternate covers out there to compare this to. Even the Super Nintendo version is almost exactly the same, just with the graphic elements of the pink background slightly moved around to better fit the horizontal window.
The cover itself is fine and honestly about what I would expect. A photo of a recently released Barbie in a pink outfit on top of a Barbie pink background, with the classic Barbie logo at the top, and then of course the Supermodel subtitle tucked in on top of a star, which technically ties into the game. It's fine for what it is and does the job, although I'll never not be amused by Sega bothering to give a VRC rating to a game like this, as if anyone would expect a Barbie game to get anything but a general audience's rating. I guess at least they were consistent though, as Barney's hide-and-seek game got one as well. Flipping over the back and, ooh, more pink. It's like someone spilled Pepto-Bismol and Adobe InDesign up in here. Bringing some balance to all that pink is 3 screenshots from the game, and they're decent, showing off the Hollywood and New York City levels, and the hair and makeup minigame. They could have been a bit bigger, but they're fine. Along with that, there's a considerable amount of flavor text back here, and it again is fine. It does describe the game very well, actually, assuming you bothered to read it. Would it have killed them to throw in a few bullet points to break things up, though? I do enjoy the closing tagline, though, thankfully delivered in italics. The glamorous world of high fashion is waiting for you. Go for it. Ah, yeah, I'm gonna sashay and Shantae Barbie all over these runways. Woo! I'm just gonna go ahead and apologize for that entire last paragraph. I seem to have got a bit carried away over a video game designed for 7-year-old girls. Perhaps I need to drink less when writing these scripts. Or more. Opening up the package, as I mentioned earlier, the manual and the cartridge isn't in quite as good a condition as the case. They're fine overall, but both clearly have seen some wear. As far as the manual goes, you get a nice introduction from Barbie herself, and then on to how to play the game, including instructions about how to speed up and slow down Barbie in the action sequences, something I didn't realize you could do when I played the game. Perhaps I should have read it a bit closer. Oops. Anyway, the rest of the manual fully explains the game and gives a detailed scoring breakdown at the end, something you might expect from a shooter or an action game. Based on the package, other than killing me with the pink, I'm actually liking what I've seen so far. Let's get to the game and see if it can surprise me as well. When I picked out Barbie Super Model this week, I'm not sure I can state just how low my expectations were for the game. I basically had 3 qualifications for a game review this week. It needed to be for the Genesis, it couldn't be a sports title since I just did World Championship Soccer last week, and I was looking to review a title from early in the alphabet. And I've got a lot of games that fit that category. At first I was looking at things like Real Monsters and Awesome Possum, both games I haven't played before that I'm definitely curious about. But then that infamous High-Tech Expressions logo got me, and I knew what I had to pick, if for no other reason than because I was incredibly apprehensive as to how bad this game might be. Leaving the Barbie license out for a minute, I need to explain High-Tech Expressions for a minute if you've never heard of them. There's plenty of game publishers from the era that you're probably familiar with as being known for making bad games. There's of course the notorious 3-letter companies THQ and LJN, both from the warped mind of Jack Friedman. And then there's a company like GameTech, who somehow managed to release essentially the same Jeopardy game on the Genesis 3 times, and delivered the absolutely awful American Gladiators that I looked at back in episode 28. And then there's High-Tech Expressions, a company that primarily from 1987 through 1994 just couldn't seem to release enough crappy licensed games and bad home computer ports of previously released games for other platforms. My main memory of High-Tech Expressions coming into this review was that of playing their version of the MTV game show Remote Control for the Commodore 64. Remote Control was and is one of my favorite television shows of all time, and as a result, I played the crap out of the home game. Not because it was any good, mind you, but because I loved the TV show so much. With the game came an advertisement for High-Tech Expressions' other games at the time, and even back then, I could look at that pamphlet and just know, wow, all these games suck. And they did. They were powerhouse titles like Win, Lose, or Draw Jr., Funhouse, and Sesame Street Let Her Go Round. So suffice it to say, between the stink of High-Tech Expressions and the Barbie license, which of course was no interest to me, I was almost afraid to pop Barbie in, not knowing what level of pain I was in for. And then something I can only describe as near miraculous happened. I started to play the game, and it didn't out and out suck. In fact, the more I played it, the more I could see how a young girl might actually enjoy playing it. But that's getting ahead of myself. Let's back up and discuss the game itself. Barbie Super Model can probably be most easily be described as an action title with fashion edutainment sequences mixed in as essentially minigames. It is, as expected, definitely aimed at a younger audience. However, and I'm not ashamed to admit, the first time I played the game, I did not win. And you might be thinking to yourself, how is that even possible? Or, boy Dave, you must really suck at video games. And my responses are, you'd be surprised, and you are not wrong. One of the reasons I lost before the end of my game in the first run, though, is because I was playing in Super Model mode, which is what I would consider the true experience the game is designed around. The game also features two other modes, Junior Model mode, which is similar to Super Model mode, but with much simpler action sequences, and then also Free Play mode, which isn't the game as much as just the various dress-up minigames, where I guess the player gets the ability to play with a virtual doll. Yes, go ahead and make your jokes here, I'm not going to go there when talking about a kid's game. In Supermodel mode, Barbie goes around the United States to participate in 4 different fashion shows, starting out in Hollywood, before moving on to Hawaii, Aspen, and finally New York City, with the goal of achieving supermodel status. To get to those fashion shows, Barbie has to travel across town to a rehearsal space where she learns her routine for the catwalk at that particular show, and then has to make it back across town to the show for her performance. Depending on the location, Barbie will have to navigate various hazards that stand in her way. In Hollywood, things start out simple enough, with Barbie just having to get around the notorious LA traffic in her Corvette. Then things pick up a bit in Hawaii, as she has to avoid beach balls, frisbees, and other beachgoers as she rollerblades off the coast. Next in Aspen, Barbie is on foot walking in the frozen tundra, while having to avoid patches of ice, slutters, and the rogue snowball from off-camera that's probably moving faster than you realize. This is what tripped me up, literally, my first time through. And finally, assuming you make it to New York City, things actually calm down a bit as you bike through Central Park, but you still have to make way for joggers, more frisbees, footballs, and dive-bombing pigeons. It's simple enough to be sure, and would have been even more so if I'd bothered to read the section of the manual that mentions how you can slow down and speed up Barbie, but honestly, it was nice to be able to just play a simple game, and each of the levels is at least varied when it comes to their look and theme. You might simply be just moving from left to right across the level, and then back right to left, while avoiding obstacles and collecting items on the ground, but is that really any different than a run-of-the-mill platformer? Breaking up the action sequences are the dress-up matching minigames, which come in 2 varieties. The first shows you a full-body shot of Barbie on a magazine cover, and you have to memorize which outfit she's wearing, along with the colors of the top, the bottom, and the shoes, and then dress her as such to match. The second minigame is similar, but now it's a headshot of Barbie, and you have to memorize the given hairstyle, earrings, and then color of eyeshadow, lipstick, and fingernails. And I'm sure that all sounds simple enough, but with only about 10 seconds to memorize all those things, it's very easy to miss a few, especially when you're a dude and you need to work on being able to tell dark red from bright red. There's no penalty if you miss 1 or 2 items, you just miss out on bonus points. However, I should mention, to achieve the true goal of the game by becoming a supermodel, you have to not just survive the 4 levels, but also score 5,000 points, so getting as many bonus points as possible from those dress-up sequences is important. That theme of having kids practice memorization also comes into play in the catwalk sequences. In the middle of each level, you're given a sequence of 4 buttons to press that corresponds to Barbie's choreography for that location's fashion show. It could be BBCC, it could be ABCA, it just depends. Again, easy to remember in theory, right? Well, remember, there's an action sequence between the rehearsal studio and the fashion show, and probably a dress-up minigame, where you're memorizing other things. Remembering that 4-button sequence after doing those other things for a few minutes is a little trickier than you might think, especially for those with short attention spans, and I really appreciate how the developers tucked in these brain exercises without seeming completely out of place and disjointed. From a graphical perspective, Barbie Super Model is actually better than I was expecting. The game is nice and colorful, as you would expect from a game based around fashion and Barbie to be, and the backgrounds are more detailed than you probably realize at first, with the waves of Hawaii showing off some actual skill from the programmers. Now, is it an amazing looking game? No, of course not. But considering my expectations were something like Where's Waldo or Sesame Street Counting Cafe, it certainly could have been worse. The sound in the game is decent as well. Nothing special here, but the background music is jaunty and fits the game. It does its job of being in the background and providing atmosphere, but you also wouldn't be missing much if the sound was turned off. The music actually reminds me a lot of Sierra adventure games from the era, with the synths being used to compose the tracks sounding similar to what I would expect to hear in one of those titles. I'm assuming this comes from High-Tech Expression's experience in creating PC ports, with the composers probably reusing some of those same tools. As far as the sound effects go, there's not many included, but the ones that are here are fine. Overall, Barbie Super Model was a far better experience than what I was expecting when I pulled it off the shelf. I wouldn't say it raises to the level of Barney's Hide and Seek game, which is so far my high watermark for edutainment titles on Genesis, but it's not horrible. Older gamers will probably get tired of it quickly, as it doesn't have a ton of replay value, unless you're challenging a second player to a high score contest. Regardless of that, I could certainly see the actual demographic that the game is aimed at having fun with it for a bit, which is kind of the whole point. Overall, I'm giving Barbie Super Model an unapologetic 2 stars, and despite its short length, the game does exactly what it sets out to do, and I don't think Barbie fans in 1993 would have been disappointed with this.
Okay, that was Barbie Super Model for the Genesis. If you're curious, the Super Nintendo version is more or less identical, but with a PCM soundtrack instead of FM, so it sounds a little different, but I wouldn't call one better than the other, just different. Whenever I can enjoy playing a game that's scheduled for this week, I consider that a win. And I did enjoy my brief time playing Barbie Super Model, just due to the fact that it was a nice, leisurely experience, but the memory and action sequences were just engaging enough to where you couldn't sleepwalk through the entire game, as I found out on that first playthrough. Stupid snowballs. Next week, I'll be staying on the Genesis, and I think it's time for another sports game. It's mid-August, which means in the United States, football season is gearing up. So, the NFL preseason is already underway, and college football starts up in about a week. Previously, I've looked at games from the John Madden series, the Joe Montana series, and even Bill Walsh, but now I think it's time to look at a game that you might never have heard of, or at least the Genesis entry, as I didn't know about it until I started collecting. And based on what I've seen so far, calling it a true football game might be debatable. Seems like it might be missing a few players, among other things. Please think about subscribing if you're so inclined, and remember, whatever you like to play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later.